I love this quote from Nielsen. The explosion in consumer-generated media over the last 2 years means consumers' reliance on word of mouth in the decision-making process, either from people they know or online conversations they don't, has increased significantly. That is, and then it goes on to talk about why that matters to marketers. And I know that every marketer out there, whether you're a brand manager, assistant brand manager, CMO, whether you are an agency servicing them, you got to be asking this question, because you can't go from, you can't see what's happened in social networking just as a society over the past 2 years. You can't go, just one example, from 50 million people to more than 500 million people in just one platform in 2 years. It really is a fundamental shift in the way we communicate. And what is consumer-generated media aside from recommendations, opinions? That's what they are, consumer-generated media. They're construction of words and videos and things. And for brands, that really matters, because we know that for brands, if we're trying to sell something, what people say, like our friends, now it's actually even people that we don't know, what people say about brands matters way more than what marketers say about brands. What people say about brands really matters. So I know you all know this, we all know this, but what is a brand to do about it? Well, that's what we're here to try to figure out today. I was very excited. There was a book that I came across from Idil Cakim, and the book is all about word of mouth and online. And she is about as forward thinking as anyone in the space, as I've talked to, as it relates to, okay, practically, how can I utilize this? Practically, I'm a brand. You know, everybody in the building is scared to death of this space of social media. They've seen what happened with other brands. What can we do? What are the steps? What do we do now? Where are we focused? She gets it. And I really think you're going to get a lot from this session. I hope you enjoy.